Hi, I'm Spencer Ziegler.
Hi, I'm Serena Halstead.
Hi, and I'm Mellisa Smith, and welcome to Data Lit, a podcast for educators by educators. So this is our third season of doing our Data Lit podcast, and we've been trying to figure out a way to keep it fresh. And so I'm so excited to announce that today is the first day of our new segment that we're calling Data Bytes, where we will be talking to different staff members from across the district about the data that they interact with in order to give our audience a sort of flavor or more comprehensive view of the kinds of data that we interact with to support schools in our school system. And so today, for our first episode of Data Bytes, we have with us Kendrick Scott from our Office of Security to share with us some of the data that they look at. Welcome, Kendrick.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me.
So Kendrick, let's start with, if you mind telling us a little bit about what you do in the Office of Security.
So my actual title is Director of Special Operations in the Security Department, and I have been with Wake County for about 15, 16 years or so. I served in the role of security administrator prior to this role, so I kind of worked out in the field in the Holly Springs, Fuquay, and Garner areas for several years, and then moved into the central area, so everything inside kind of the Raleigh Beltline for about 4 or 5 years. And then made transition over here to Crossroads 1, where I reside now, and where I'm currently sitting.
Your job is much more likely to make for a compelling TV show than ours.
Yeah. A day in the life of, for me, I think the guys that work in the field more so, but yeah, it's never the same. Even today, this is probably the only thing I'm going to get to that I actually had scheduled to do today. We'll actually get that because it just, whatever happens from 1 minute to the next is what we end up doing. So we juggle a lot of stuff.
All right. Well, we don't want to keep you back. So let's kind of get started and jump in. So one of the questions that we have is, when you hear the word data literacy, what does that word mean to you?
So I think data literacy to me is, using data that's relevant to your core function of what you do for the district that will help you become more efficient in what you're doing. So in case of Office of Security, we use data in ways that will help keep students safe within our buildings. And so from a broad sense, that's kind of what, how we utilize data literacy and use data to help drive decisions that we make in our department.
So what are some examples of some data that you do interact with in order to accomplish those goals?
Great question. So we have an SRO MOU or Memorandum of Understanding that requires them to send us certain data points quarterly. And they do that through actually working with the Data and Accountability Department right now, helping us organize that data. But it sends us information that we can use to identify trends or incidents or disparities in student conduct or contact with law enforcement. And then we can then craft kind of how we operate based on that information. Another, I think, piece of data that we get is No Child Left Behind data points that we get from my suspension data. And all those things can help drive how we keep students safe. So just for example, if we're getting certain data points that show like conflict with students in certain areas of a school or at certain times of the year, or at certain schools in the district, we can then bring that information to the school administration and help craft supervision plans. It also helps us kind of craft when we put security infrastructure, whether it be card access or cameras in buildings or how many cameras or card access go into buildings, that all those data points can help us determine how best to serve those schools.
That's fascinating. So it sounds like you're getting data from a lot of different sources. How do you analyze it all? How do you figure out what's telling you, what's not telling you, what to prioritize, all that?
So, there's 11 law enforcement agencies that serve Wake County, right? And so all of them supply us with that quarterly data. And then we have, our No Child Left Behind data that comes through us typically through like an ECATS, like suspension reports. So we get that stuff. But all of those things we'd have to look at to kind of craft how we want to make a decision based on something. So and even, city data sometimes can play a role in that. So, if there's a part of Wake County that has a high crime rate of violent crime or just property crimes, that data can be looked at and used to determine whether we need fencing, more exterior cameras, or it could even be used to determine that we place an allied universal security officer at that location. So it could be, we look at a lot of different data points, but they all determine different types of things. Looking at No Child Left Behind, persistently dangerous school data, that really drives a lot of decision making if a school were to be labeled persistently dangerous. And in Wake County, currently, we don't have any that are labeled that way. But if we did have one that happened to fall into that category, that triggers a whole lot of different policies, procedures, and things, even from the state, that we would have to come into compliance with. So we try to use the information that comes into us as best we can to help drive a lot of decisions that we do make. Because then, at the end of the day, not only is it all about keeping kids safe, but it's also being fiscally responsible with the resources that we have and being able to justify why we make certain decisions, such as putting fencing at a certain school or putting a lot of exterior cameras at a certain location or placing an allied universal officer at one school versus not at another. So all of that stuff is kind of justified and analyzed through looking at data points so we can make an informed decision to make sure the schools are as safe as they possibly can be.
It's interesting that you're making different decisions than like a classroom teacher might, but what I'm hearing, it sounds like a very similar this underlying skill set and what you do, how you collect some data yourself, some's coming from outside agencies, some has impacts from like accountability systems and all that you're using to figure out what to do or what not to do. It's interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Kendrick. So I'm also listening to you. It's you're working with present data, but you're also going back in time and looking for trends in data that has been collected. So it seems like you're constantly juggling two acts. I need to make sure that what is going on right now, I'm addressing it. But then also I need to always be paying attention to things that has happened already to see if there's a trend and maybe seeing, is there any relationship with what is going on right now? So a constant movement of you processing data, right?
Absolutely.
So I have one question here for you. What is one fact about data you work with that our listeners might find interesting?
So I think that, when you look at crime stat data, sometimes, you may have a perception of a particular location that could be that you may think is completely safe, like nothing ever happens at this place. And an external data point, which could be crime statistical data that's supplied by a local law enforcement agency, could suggest that your perception of that area doesn't necessarily match what's actually going on, because there's a lot of things that happen, especially things like property crime, that they don't make the news every day. It's not like you turn on WRAL and find out that a whole bunch of cars have been broken into somewhere near where a school is, and those things then drive hey, is this a case where we probably need to put some protective measures in place because the school is, the address of the school is not going to change. So we have to do things to take protective actions in case we start seeing trends and things that happen over time. And I'm hopefully that law enforcement folks are looking at a lot of times at that same data. So if they see that there's a lot of particular property crime happening in a certain area, or it could be violent crime that's happening in a certain area, they'll then adjust their focus to that area, to especially when school's involved and we have kids around some of these areas that may suffer a different crime stat than other areas. It helps, I think, both of us look through the same lens at the same things with the same goal, which is keeping kids safe when they're in our buildings. So that's kind of, and getting back to your point of looking at trends and it's not only what happens now, because you don't want to make knee-jerk reactions on something, especially when you're looking at spending money. Fencing costs a lot of money, for example. So you want to make sure that you're looking at something over a period of time to give you, is this really something, or is it just something that's lightning in a bottle? It just happened, for a quick couple of days or a couple of weeks, and then it went away. And you don't want to go out and spend a lot of money and resources in something that may not really be a trend. So that's one of the things I think that data really does for you, is it kind of gives you not only a snapshot of a moment in time, but it can give you a look over a long period of time to make those long forecasting decisions on things that you may want to do to protect the school.
Thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
When you were talking, I heard you talk about even monitoring like key access. I didn't even think about that. Like, I guess every time we enter or leave, well, I guess enter a building and we use our key fobs, even all of that information that you're collecting about who's going in and who's not going. And I never even thought about, yeah, again, that's a piece of information that is being collected.
Yeah, we don't typically use those data points really to know, because we know when staff are going in buildings, right? Because you hit a card reader, yeah, that does capture some data for us, but those things are really used in conjunction with other processes. You go into a building at, someone goes in after hours, for example, or on Saturday, they forgot something left it at their house or left it at school. So they go back to get it.
That has been me.
Yeah. And then they happen to, they know that their badge will open the door. They go in there and they trip the alarm. They go into their classroom and pick up their wallet or their purse or whatever they forgot, and they leave. And we have no idea. All we do is get an alarm that someone was in the school on Saturday at 2:00 in the afternoon. Well, then we can go back and pull data to show who actually went into the building at what time. That will tell us when someone was there. And we're like, oh, okay, it's a staff member. It wasn't a break-in. But yeah, most of I think the data that we use to actually drive decisions is kind of based on student activity and or crime type data that actually drives how we set up security infrastructure. Or it could just be, again, if there's a school that, I don't know, if you're looking at suspension data, for example, and there's a lot of conflict or fights going on in a certain school, that may drive us to talk with the administration on supervision plans. Like, hey, if we look at, you've had a lot of conflict here in your building, here's the locations where that's been happening in your building, maybe we can help you with developing a staff supervision plan, because typically when staff is present, those things go away. And once those things go away, then suspension data typically follows right behind it and goes down. And those are the types of things where we can really dig down and look at data points, make a decision, take action, and hopefully see the fruits of that labor by way of less suspensions happening in that building.
Yeah, it's neat to hear you talking about kind of collecting all these different data points together to say, like, what do they, like, as you put them together as a puzzle, kind of tell you? Because it's something that we talk about with classes a lot, that it's tempting sometimes if you're looking at, FastBridge data, you go into the FastBridge program to forget to like step back and connect it with other data sources to figure out, what the goal might be it, student outcomes or safety, whatever it might be. So that's neat to hear those connections with how you use data and how our teachers might use data.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really would, if there was some data points that I really haven't kind of put, like when you say put the puzzle together, that I haven't really dug into, is to see, when we look at these things, because we're looking at it through a security lens, right? Not necessarily an academic lens, because we're not teachers in our department. But it would be interesting to see some of the things that we look at and how that's impacted student learning and how those things may or may not help student learning. Because I don't know. I say may or may not, because I have no idea. I've never really looked at, but it would be interesting to see, is there a correlation between things like suspension data and student grades, learning, and that type of thing. I got to think that there is, because you typically learn more when you stay in the building, and if you're not in the building as much, you typically don't learn as much. So, if we're making security-based decisions that help reduce suspensions, then that would, I would think, maybe drive academic success going up. But I don't know. It's one of those things I've always wondered, but I don't really track academic data because I'm a security guy.
Yeah, but because Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or even just the idea of like the amygdala, that if someone doesn't feel safe, then they can't be thinking about the kind of deeper learning that we want. I think that's a great example of how what happens in our classrooms is the shared responsibility of everybody, and how everybody within our system and within our communities contributes to student success. So thank you for what you do.
Absolutely. We've always long said in our department that if students and staff don't feel safe, staff can't teach and kids can't learn. That's just the bottom line. And and even staff, at Crossroads for that matter. I mean, if you're in your building, no matter where you are, if you don't feel safe, you can't focus on what your core function is.
True.
And myself included. I mean, if I was sitting in Crossroads and didn't feel safe sitting here, whatever was causing me not to feel safe will be taken away from what I'm supposed to be doing. And there's no way that you're going to be able to do your job effectively if you don't feel safe.
Yeah.
I also like to hear you talk about, because, from time to time, suspension data makes the news or, that kind of thing. But it was interesting to hear your connection to suspension data in that looking at it and helping a school process through what do they need to put in place. Like a lot of times we think of suspension data and, we look at our subgroups, but hearing you talking about suspension data or, or fights or conduct and helping a school figure out, okay, well, what plans do we need to put in place? Like I would not have thought of, Office of Security is involved in that type of work. And so it's interesting to see the connections with how our data connects us.
So Kendrick, I'm assuming with you, coming into schools and assisting, looking at suspension data and all, I know that when I was in school, we had like a committee that deals with safety. Mm-hmm. So am I to assume that your department or members of your department are part of just about every school's safety committee? Would that be true?
I would say we're a part of every school's, but we're a resource to every school. So if you're on a safety committee at your school and there's you're trying to get prepared for severe weather drills or that type of thing, you would reach out and let's say you're having problems trying to figure out where to shelter in place for a tornado drill. We're the people you'd call and we'll come out there and kind of help walk through what you can do to identify areas of refuge for severe weather. So we're really a clearinghouse of just about anything safety and security related for anyone that has an issue in their building. So while we're not necessarily, I would say, a part of, we are definitely a tool for those safety committees.
Okay, so I'm assuming if a school want and they have like a safety plan, they can always run it by your department and say, look this over. Do you think are we doing this right according to the law? Things like that. They can always reach out for your support where their plan is concerned, right?
Right. So the district has a district-wide comprehensive emergency operations plan that covers just about anything we can think of emergency-wise that would happen throughout the district. And that's a standardized plan that has a component of it that's individualized for each school, and that's completed annually by every school. And if they have any questions about anything that's in there, whether it's lockdown procedures, missing child procedures, severe weather, evacuations, fires, any of that type of stuff, they can give us a call and we will go out there and make sure that they have what they need to effectively manage an emergency on their property.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I have my last question. Is there a piece of data that you are not currently collecting that you wish you had?
Yeah, so I think I'd go back to that academic piece, right? Because we are just the security people. Our overarching large function for the entire district, obviously, is academics first and everything. Our world is kind of safety and security first for everything. So it would be kind of neat to see how sometimes our efforts, if and how it could be impacting learning. Again, if we have to go out and help an administration with again, going back to maybe a staff supervision plan that helps reduce suspensions, does that in turn have some type of positive effect on their testing scores or their academic achievement scores? Because we never know any of that. We just go when there's a problem, we try and help do the solving piece of it, and then we take off. And we don't really know if our efforts tie into the overarching goal of a school, which is to educate the kids. So if there was anything I'd kind of wonder, it would probably be that. And I don't have those data points to be able to make that correlation.
Well, even if you don't, just know that there's so many variables that go into the success of a school. And definitely, like we've said, safety is definitely one of the things that matters. So I don't want to keep you much longer. So I want to say thank you, Mrs. Scott, for enlightening us about the data that your team interacts with in support of the work that we all do in this district to make sure that kids are learning and staff are feeling safe. On behalf of my colleagues, I'd like to say again, thank you, thank you, thank you. You have been listening to our, again, first Data Bytes conversation. If you have questions, comments, or further notes, or is there someone else you'd like to hear from in our district about the data that they use, feel free to reach out to us at www.wcpss.net/datalit. I want to thank Meyer Smith from Enloe High School for her contribution to the music. And until next time, bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.